Hello everybody and welcome to my new tutorial on how to create a pop-up in Bricks Builder. This one will get a bit complicated in terms of the JavaScript code, but I've tried to provide a code which can be used by everyone and which will be pretty easy to implement. I'm giving you a short overview. So that's the code, but all you have to do is just copy that line of code, and that's where you can adapt the behavior of your pop-up. So you will of course need to copy that code too, but you don't have to change here anything. You just have to change those parameters provided here, and here you can also see a full list of all parameters available. So let's get started by adding a new page, and let's call it Popup. Hit edit with bricks, and the markup here is quite easy to achieve. So I'm gonna drop here a container and give it a width and a height of 100 view width and 100 view height, so to make it full screen. And let's give it a background color which is a bit transparent so that we can see the page. What you need to do here, so those settings are optional and you could style it whatever you would like to, but what you really need to do is giving your pop-up an ID. You could call this whatever you would like to. I'm gonna call it just pop-up to keep things easy. Let's name this here pop-up container. Inside our container, I'm going to drop another container, and that will be where our content will be placed later. So let's just change this here to something white, and that's it. So you could style your pop-up using the container element, and let's center it, or if you want to have it on the right side, center side, or at the start. You could then drop here any element you would like to. So just drop here a few, I don't know, let's add a list item. And yeah, just a heading or something like that. You could place here whatever you would like to. That's it. So that's all you need to have for the setup. You just need to give it a specific ID and style it whatever you would like to have it. I'm gonna drop here just another container. For the basic behavior of our pop-up, there is always a default behavior which will be a click option, but you could also set it to scroll or to unload. So I'm gonna show you that later. We are doing just a quick default pop-up to see how easy it is to set it up, and then I'm gonna show you the full list of parameters available. So for that, I am dropping here a button. There it is. And there is a default class for the button. You could change that later if you would like to, but that's the default class which will trigger our modal or our pop-up. So let's copy that and let's give that button a class of wcd_openModal. So that's it. We're just adding our code element here, and there it is. So let's get rid of that and let's jump over to our site. So I have also provided a short PHP snippet which will check if you are inside the builder, and if you are inside the builder, it will prevent the JavaScript code from execution. If you're outside on the builder, which means you're on the page or you're the visitor of the page, then the code can get executed. I found that quite helpful because, for example, if you set your pop-up to appear on scroll, it would also appear here in the builder, which is quite annoying. So that's why I have provided that snippet here, which holds the code from execution, and then you can easily style your pop-up here inside the builder, and outside the builder it works as expected. So just copy paste that PHP code here, and for the pop-up part I'm gonna add here 2 script tags, or I open and a closing one, and let's just copy that code here, the JavaScript code, and paste it here inside our script tags. That won't do anything at all, because you will need to have that lines of code, and that's the really minimal setup of the pop-up. So when pasting that code here, all you need to do is replacing that placeholder ID with your ID. Just to show you again, I have set an ID of Popup here. So you will need to set that ID to whatever you have chosen as your ID. Let's hit execute code, hit save, and look how it looks like on the front end. So as you can see, when I'm scrolling down, there is no pop-up here anymore, and if I press the button, the pop-up appears. There are 3 different options to close that pop-up. The first option is just click outside the pop-up. If I click inside, nothing happens, but when I click outside, I can close it. The other option is hit the escape key, which will also close the pop-up. And the third option would be a closing icon. And for that, I need to add an icon, or you could also use a button or any other element. But normally you see an icon for the closing thing. I'm gonna give this here a close icon. And there is also a default class for closing the pop-up, which can be seen here. It's the WCD_close model. You could also adapt that later to anything you want to, but for now I'm gonna stick with that class. So let's give it a class of WCD_close model, and when I open my pop-up here on the front end again, you can see when I click here on the close icon, it gets closed too. So those are the 3 options for closing the pop-up. Hit the escape key, click outside, or click that icon with that specific class. That's a pretty basic modal. You could use that for a menu navigation, for example, but maybe you want to have a bit more advanced pop-up, and that's why I did it that way, because you could easily add parameters here, as you can see here in the table, and change the behavior of the pop-up. So let's just say we want to have a pop-up which opens on load. I have provided here you hear a full example with all parameters available, so you could copy that and just delete the lines you don't want to have. But yeah, I'm gonna walk through through every element. So let's just do an onload pop-up. We will need to jump over to our code here, and there it is. So let's just add here on load and set it to true. The default value here is false. So when we set this to true, the page reloads, and after reloading the page, the pop-up appears. There is a default value for the timeout, so for the delay when the pop-up will open, which is 1500 milliseconds, which means it's about 1.5 seconds. If you want to change that time, maybe you want to have it open after, let's say, I don't know, let's say 2 seconds, then you have to change this to 2000. Hit save, and after reloading the site, the pop-up appears after 2 seconds. You could change that to whatever you would like to. If you want to have it open immediately after page load, set this to 1, and there it is. So that's the onload option. There is also another option, which is the scroll option. So if you want to have your pop-up open after a certain scroll distance here, you just need to set this to scroll through. And you could also combine all those parameters. So you can have an onload option, you can have a scroll option, or you could just have one option for your model. So however you would like to have this. But let's say we want to have all options. Let's set this to scroll through, and it's loading on load. And after scrolling here, it also gets opened. For the scroll option, there is only, or it gets triggered only once. So if I scroll here again, it doesn't get triggered anymore. For the click option, for example, I could trigger it as often as I want to. And of course, for the onload option, because the page is only loading once, it also gets triggered only once. If you want to adapt that scroll distance, there is also a parameter here, which is distance, and you can set that, for example, to 300. So here it opens on page load, and if I scroll down here, it gets triggered a bit earlier. So you can adapt that value to whatever you would like to. There are also, or let's just do the click option. The click option is true by default. So you can set that to false if you don't want to have it opened at a certain click. But you could also just leave out that trigger button and don't assign that default class of WCD open model, then it would also wouldn't be clickable or wouldn't open by click. But let's say you want to have it open at click, and you want to have another class for the trigger, which would be very helpful if you have multiple pop-ups on your site. So let's say you have a menu navigation, and you have another pop-up for a newsletter subscription, and then you don't want to have them get opened by the same trigger. So that's why you need 2 different triggers. And let's add here another trigger, and let's call it open. You don't have to assign any dots here for the classes. So just type the name you want to have here. I have to, or let's show it. If I don't change the class of the button, it doesn't get open by click. So when I change the class of the button here to open, as we did it in the code, then it gets open by click again. There is also another parameter you can adapt, which is the closing class, and which is the class we gave here the icon. So if you want to have another class name here, I mean, there is no purpose for multiple pop-ups, because you could use the same class for more than one pop-up, since there is only one open at the same time. But maybe there is a special scenario where you want to change that class. So I've provided here the parameter closing class, which is responsible for that. So you could just go here and let's say closing class will be close, for example. So we need to change that class at our icon too, so that it will hold the right class. Let's call it close. And here it is. When we click it, it gets closed again. That's about the parameters you can change. And let's say you want to have more than one pop-ups on your site. That's also very easy to achieve. I'm gonna just duplicate that one here, and let's make it look a bit different so we can see what's going on. So let's give it here a yellow background color, and let's align this here to the right side. We need to assign another ID, so it's important that the ID stays unique. Let's call this a new pop-up, and in our code we have to initialize another pop-up then. So what we did here is we called the first pop-up with our ID of pop-up, and now we want to have another pop-up. Let's say we call it const, and we need to have this one unique here too, because this is a variable or it's more precisely a constant, but you need to have this unique too. So let's call this new model, which is also a new WCD model. You can copy that from the site and just strip out those parameters you don't want to have, but I'm gonna type it here. So let's give it a model ID of, we said, new pop-up, and let's just leave it as it is here. So let's close this. And the new pop-up won't get open now because we changed that class here, but just want to show you that it only opens one. So we need to have another trigger here. So let's just type here the new pop-up to make it clear. And we're gonna give that the default class again, which is WCD_open model. So maybe we just get rid of that onload from the first one. Let's set this to false. Yeah. So when I click here the first button, this one gets opened, and when I click the second button, the new pop-up gets opened here. So, and of course you could also add here a scroll distance for the second pop-up and all the other parameters we saw at the first one. So let's set this to scroll through, and let's give it a higher distance of about 900. So, oh, it jumped to true again. So now it should, okay. So when I start scrolling, the first one should appear on the left, and after another distance, the second one should appear on the right side. Let's try this. Yep, the first one works, and the second one is now here too. So that's okay. The closing button doesn't work because we changed that class here. We would also need to change it back to WCD close modal, and then it should work again. Yeah, there it is. So that's a pretty easy way to set up multiple pop-ups on your site. You could do whatever you would like to do. You don't need, as I mentioned earlier, you don't need that backdrop color. You could style it whatever you would like to. If you want to give it a shadow, for example, a box shadow here, let's just do that too. So maybe you're not a fan of that backdrop color. Let's just give it a shadow. And when I click it here, it kind of looks like it's inside that page. Yeah. Whatever you would like to style it. So that's pretty much everything about it. I hope it's easy to follow for everyone. If you're facing any problems, just let me know. I'm happy if I can help you. And yeah, of course, I'm also happy if you give me any feedback. So just let me know your thoughts about it, and I hope you have fun by setting it up.